So at the heart of AER is our peer-reviewed open access journal, Ecological Solutions and Evidence, and it offers article types such as from practice, data articles, registered reports that are tailored for both researchers and practitioners to better and more openly communicate about our work, with their work. We are broadcasting these free online workshops as we prepare for the launch of our fully searchable database on AER later this year. So we'd like to thank our two sponsors for this month's AER Live. Ecological Resources Limited, it's a specialist ecological consultancy firm who fund the British Ecological Society's Ecology, the Next Generation bursary scheme. The bursary scheme supports 4 young ecologists from low-income backgrounds to study and begin their careers in applied ecology. And then NHBS, our other sponsor, this is a UK-based supplier of books and equipment for ecologists, and details of their services and their exclusive offer for AER Live viewers are provided in a slide at the end of the workshop. So I'll shortly hand over to our speaker, Matthew Bowell, who's giving today's talk. But let me first quickly say that we're recording this talk and we're going to post the video online. And if you have questions that come up during the workshop, use the Zoom chat box, and then we'll pick a few of those questions and ask our speaker during the Q&A portion of the talk at the end from the submitted questions. So without waiting any longer, let me introduce today's speaker, Matthew Bowell, and his talk, Exchanging Knowledge Through Grey Literature, Guidance and Encouragement for Contributors from Outside Academia. Thanks, Matthew.
Hopefully people can see that. So yeah, my name is Matthew Bowell. I work for Atkins. I'm based in the UK. And my talk today is about exchanging knowledge through grey literature, guidance and encouragement for contributors from outside of academia. Presentation will cover what is grey literature, applied use of grey literature, and authoring grey literature. And then this little photograph of some Devon coastal heathland is just to remind me that most of these examples are UK based because that's where I'm based. So apologies for people who are not familiar with the UK, but that is what I'm familiar with. So starting off with the problem that AER in particular is trying to solve. It's the issue of inadequate preservation of and discoverability of grey literature. We need to ensure that there are evidence-based decision-making across environment and conservation, and just the research papers, the dry academia, as you might say, is not enough to inform real-world applications. And there's an ongoing frustration between both researchers on one side and practitioners on the other side. That there's an evident gap between research and practice, and possibly if there's evident gap, maybe it should be evidence gap as well. So the thesis behind Ecological Solutions and Evidence and AER is of effectively sharing conservation research and evidence for the greater good. It's no good hid underneath bushels. Informing evidence-based decision-making, science in conservation, and conservation-based science. These lemons here are an example that Bill Sutherland used when he was launching the Conservation Evidence website a few years back, relating to scurvy. Back in the 13th century, scurvy was a problem for sailors, and the knowledge that vitamin C and other lemons and other fresh vegetables were the way to combat scurvy was known, but the transfer of that information across all of the seafaring nations was a very slow process, took hundreds of years. And if that information had been shared in a timely way and effectively, then probably a lot of sailors' lives would have been saved. So just sort of going into a real world case study. The cell bunting is a species of small bunting. There's a population of it in the southwest of England. This is Devon in the southwest of England. The RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, does a lot of work, a different variety of different scales for birds within the UK and wider. They started some research. They funded a few PhDs and the like, sort of starting around in the late 80s, 1988, to try and find out why cell bunting had declined in the UK from formerly fairly large spread to what was in 1989 only 118 pairs left, all in Devon in the southwest of England. And there was some great work, and I remember seeing some talks a few years back at BES conferences from PhD students and the like, talking about how they'd identified that, the key critical factors that were limiting success and causing the decline of cell bunting. And they included winter foraging availability, weedy stubble fields, spilt grain, seeds, and then when it came to the summer nesting period, suitable hedges and scrub with the close proximity of the foraging habitat, and a change to grassland with invertebrate-rich habitats there. So they started to identify exactly what was needed in order to work the landscape for cell buntings. And then they worked with landowners, with farm owners, and some of the countryside stewardship funding and similar UK government funds to specifically manage land for cell bunting. So they knew exactly, from the research, they could target exactly what was required. And in 2016, they had reached 1,000 pairs. There's now been, and if you can see, but further down the sort of far southwest of this, there's been a reintroduction into Cornwall, which is the adjacent county. And so the project has resulted in an 800% increase in the population of cell bunting, purely through, or largely driven by the scientific knowledge being able to drive the on the ground actions that were taken. So it's a really great example of science and practitioner working together. And the following slide just gives an example. So this is an advice note produced by the Devon County Council and the local councils, which talks about development in particular of land which might potentially have impacts on cell buntings, and follows down the expectations of the council in terms of planning protection, in terms of delivery of alternative habitat and protecting habitat where possible. And I was looking at this, I noticed there's an appendix in the back of this document which has some habitat requirements justifications, just summarizes what the habitat requirements of the species are. And it's a great, just looking at the references, just these 4 references, a great mix of technical biological conservation research papers. This one, the first and the third. Second one is an RSPB report on the species, and the third one is a wider review of sites. But that sort of practical intermingling of the sort of dry academic research and more grey literature just seems to be a really good example, and the document itself as a very practical practical delivery of the science that was involved of that project. So moving on to this sort of, I don't want to present it as a clash, but the difference between academia and practitioners. Practitioners quite often are people which are outside academia, whether they are alumni who have degrees of one type or another, or whether they don't have degrees. They're typically outside of academia, but in particular, those people like me who kind of left with a degree or two and went off to work as a professional ecologist, needs to remember, I think, that being outside academia shouldn't mean being outside of science, and we don't leave our scientific training behind us. We take it with us, and sort of remembering we're a scientist is a really important part of doing useful work going forwards. I tried to find out in my sort of academics versus practitioners thesis. I was trying to find out the difference between biological graduates going into sort of practice and going into research academia. The data I don't think exists for the UK. This is from a Prospects AC UK, what graduates are doing 6 months after graduation. A relatively small percentage are in sort of science professional jobs, and the others are in a variety of different roles. It doesn't really tell us how many people are going into academia. And then some UK government research, longitudinal educational outcomes, give us a bit more of an idea about long-term employment. So from 1 year after graduation, 44% are in sustained employment, and 10 years after, 75%. That doesn't really tell us what proportion of biology graduates are doing conservation work, what proportion of biology graduates and sort of variety of sciences are working in academia, and how many are working elsewhere. But it's the beginning of a thought. So what I thought I'd start off in this talk was just ask the people who called in today how would they describe themselves. So an ecology conservation practitioner of any kind, whether like me, an ecological consultant or a land manager or something, with a biology, earth sciences, however, degree or equivalent, an ecology conservation practitioner, but without a biology sciences degree, or someone who's not working in ecology at all, or someone who's working in academia or other. Marvelous. I think most people have contributed. Thank you very much. So there's a clear split. I'm not sure whether people can see that or not. The majority of people are outside of academia, but with a biology sciences degree. That's 51%. The next largest is 38% who are in academia. So I have to be careful not to make any disparaging remarks about academia during the rest of the talk. But it's good to know that this talk, which is aimed at people outside of academia, there's a good number of people who fall into that bracket. So I think I sort of mentioned this earlier on. When we're out and about in our wellies doing whatever it is we do, it's just really important to remember that as a practitioner, with or without scientific, the chances are that what we are doing involves thinking in a scientific way. Whether that's following a methodology, whether that it might be as simple as cutting a grassland at a certain time of the year in a certain way, developing what we do, trying something new. You found out that cutting the grassland in a certain way at a certain time of the year gave you one thing, but maybe if you moved it and reacting to what works. We went out on site and we've been monitoring in this way for a certain number of years, and it's given us this result. But what happens if we change it, or can we do more of this or less of this? Just as practitioners, sorry, this photograph here is actually my desk. This is the books that are holding up my screen to make it at the right height. Just, what information sources influences our action as practitioners? This is a sort of brief list I hacked together. Guidance, whether that's national guidance or organisational guidance, policy, again, government policy or organisational policy, experience, our own experience, or case studies that we've read about how things can or should be done, the legislation which governs our actions, textbooks and field guides, like Thesis there. Scientific papers which we may resort, or not when we need specific organisation, it may have a way of dictating how that's done. Peer experience, so how other people have done things, and personal experience. So sort of moving on towards the grey literature. So the next poll is really about how much you think that you use or contribute to grey literature. So is that occasionally or rarely? So I'm just launching it now. Occasionally or rarely use or contribute to grey literature. Use it but never really contribute, or never use or contribute. So majority of people use it occasionally or rarely, both as users and contributors. 31%, quite a high proportion, regularly use and contribute. Use or and contribute, and a smaller number use but never contribute, and a very small number never use or contribute. Again, thank you very much for interacting with that. So sort of moving on, how is the material that we as practitioners use influenced? I think that this is a sort of summary of the list that I put up earlier. Primary legislation, whether the laws of the country, secondary legislation and central government guidance, non-statutory organisational guidance, practical how-to guides, case law, scientific research. I think are the sort of a summary of the information that we use, and the information that informs those are scientific research, biological census. It's only by knowing that numbers are decreasing or low of certain species that we make decisions about how to protect them, or what is appropriate protection, which is driven by scientific research and census in particular. Modelling predictions, what's likely to happen in the future, or what we know is happening at the moment. Case law, when you get into practical work, previous case law, I know it's in both columns, but it affects how legislation, guidance, etc. are put together, and also affects case law. Policy and opinion, whether it's public opinion, local opinion, politicians' opinion, all affects how things are done, how legislation, how case law, what research is done. Practitioner experience, so what has happened in the past, how things work, and debate, discussions at all levels, whether they're government legislators levels or scientific levels, between non-statutory organisations, statutory advisors to government, all those things ultimately influence the material that we use. So just another example. Again, this is from the UK, so apologies to those of you who are outside of the UK. In the United Kingdom, bats are protected by the Wildlife and Countryside Act and other legislation as well, but they've received sort of relatively strict legal protection. There's UK government, so Natural England, the UK government advisement, the UK government itself provide advice in the public domain on what should be done, licensing, how to deal with bats. Publication, this is a book, The Bat Workers Manual, produced by the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, which is a statutory organisation forming part of government, which gives advice on a variety of methods relating to working with bats. There's other good practice guides. An example here is produced by the Bat Conservation Trust, which is a non-statutory organisation, but that's another sort of how-to guide, which is informed by a variety of science, policy, and practical experience. We can then go to specific databases. The Bat Tree Habitat Key is essentially a wiki type database where people enter where they have experiences of finding bats in trees, try and describe the nature of the feature and what was there, and that information is then put together into a report or a booklet, which talks about from that practical experience where bats are, where they might be found, what to expect. We can also then go into conservation evidence and search for bats. It's difficult to see, sorry, particularly if you've got a small screen. There's actions that have been subject to the conservation evidence meta-analysis relating to bats, and then there's individual studies relating to bats, and then this is one that I've just pulled out from conservation evidence, implementation and effectiveness of bat roost mitigation and compensation measures in England and Wales. So it's a report on the success of bat roosting provision that have been undertaken as part of what is essentially wildlife and countryside legislation. So there's this display of information that runs through through the work we do in practice. Now, this is just an example of a species group that exercises interest in my field, but there's similar examples will exist elsewhere for other species groups, other practical applications. Practice always poses more questions. This is just a list of questions that have, in one way or another, occurred to me variously. How do we know where things are, or where or are not present? That protected species is present in a site that we are interested in. What are the critical components of habitats for a species? If we start to affect it, will that matter? What will happen to the function of a habitat or ecosystem? Very specific. This is the Avon Gorge in Bristol, where I'm from. There's some endemic white beams that live within this area. we did some work a few years back looking at traffic along the A4, which runs through the middle of the Avon Gorge, and changes in traffic. What will changes in traffic numbers do to those populations of endemic white beams? Questions that come up. Back to bats a little. How much light will deter commuting bat? This is a question that exercises us quite often. Light pollution. We know that light pollution deters bats, but then there has been some good research on it. But if we put this light here, will it affect them? Will it not? Will they be deterred from commuting to a location where they need to forage? What will noise impact ecological fitness? If we start disturbing things, where are the tipping points of when that has an impact? You might argue that a single noise disturbance issue wouldn't be an issue, but continuous noise would. What about attenuation? What about a customization, etc.? Very specific question. What flow rate do migrating Alice shad require if you're designing a overpass weir for which needs to allow rare fish, like for example the Alice shad, to migrate? What's the speed? What's the design requirements for it? What's the best depth of water for an avocet? When we talk to engineers, they're always talking about design parameters. If you're designing a lagoon for an avocet, then the design parameters broadly relate to the length of its legs. What are the implications of a management treatment? What can we predict will happen? What do we know will happen? It's just a sort of rag bag of questions, but those are the questions that occur to me and similar. I'm sure you've all got your own questions of one type or another. So sort of moving on, what is grey literature? Grey literature is a catch-all term, refers to factual and research-based material produced outside of traditional commercial and academic communication channels. It's not your peer-reviewed scientific papers, but it includes a wide range of information types, including, but not limited to, research summaries, case studies, policy documents, conference proceedings. And I think it's part of a dialogue between academia and practitioners. Grey literature should spark that discussion. Should be a starting point. If research knows the questions that the practice has, then academia will know which questions they should be asking, which questions they should be looking into. So public research reports are places where dialogue can happen. Forums, workshops, conferences. Obviously, we're a little bit in slightly odd situation these days with workshops and face-to-face communications, but those discussions can occur in different ways, and I'm sure will occur again. Direct discussions between people, being able to have that direct communication. It's not very easy to sometimes, as a practitioner, find out how to discuss with an academic on a question you have, and I think that maybe if a route through grey literature can be found to make that easier for those discussions to open up, then I'm sure it'll be useful for everybody. Professional journals, a great way of information being presented, and again, people to pick up and discuss, bring up ideas. Conservation evidence, which I've mentioned previously, is a great place, is a great receptacle for both individual reports and synthesis of reporting in general. And AER will also in the future be that position where if you can contribute some grey literature into AER, it may spark additional work, or if there's a good idea there, then somebody else looks at it and picks it up and moves it on, and hopefully that will allow movement between sort of academia and practice is the intention. So my final poll, and then you can all rest. Again, the question is, what stops you from contributing to grey literature? And the idea has never occurred to me. I suppose I never thought I would. I'm not sure about experimental design or write about where to start. I don't really feel I have anything to share, or I just simply don't have time with other commitments. Thank you all. Not very conclusive because the answer was other. But it largely seems to be I don't have time, or other. So mixed, I think, is probably the answer. So what to write up? This water bowl is a great example of something which is an opportunity. At some point during work handling water bowls, somebody realised that a Pringles tube is the perfect size for handling a water bowl. And although that's not a great scientific discovery in itself, it's kind of novel and useful to a lot of people. So I don't think it's worth writing a paper about, but it's something to share. But what should we be thinking about contributing grey literature to? I think summarises treatments and opportunities. We've got changes in management, how things are managed, what you're doing. Long time observations of change are useful. Challenging received wisdom. If there's a way of doing things that in your experience doesn't work, then write that up. Or if there's a new way of doing something which does work, then write that up. Similarly, failures are as important as successes. There may be elements of a failure which are important, both in experimental design or how you went about it, or just reporting so somebody else doesn't have to have the same failure again. Replicable case studies, really useful for sharing and taking on. What to write up? Anything. Positive results, negative results. Declaration of intents. This is where, rather than writing up something afterwards, if you publish an intention to do some work, and we're hoping that there'll be a process within AER for this, gives the opportunity for if it doesn't work, it doesn't just get lost forever. That the fact that you did something and it didn't work, it reduces that publication bias of people only publishing what was successful. Even if when you're chased up and someone says you had some intentions but you didn't do them, you can say, well, we did but it failed. Then at least that can be recorded. And I think, as I said earlier on, ideas seed other ideas. If you get out there and the dialogue begins, then you move on. And opportunities. This is a photograph from a local site of mine, just about the 2 meter gap and coronavirus. And coronavirus may have brought us lots of bad things, but it's certainly given us lots of opportunities. This is Snowdon, the highest mountain in Wales, which has been mobbed by people this year. And conversely, from ITV earlier on this year, London streets empty. There's been some large changes in the way people in particular have been moving around, acting, being, where they've been, what they've been doing this year, and that may mean that on a smaller scale, management techniques that were normally done can't be done. Changes, restrictions that have stopped that. And we've almost built ourselves some sort of randomized case studies in terms of a treatment which has been forced on us. So if you're looking for an opportunity for research, then 2020 does present that, if nothing else. This little summary comes from Tiny Recorder, who is a Lego man who goes around and visits various places in the UK looking at nature, but often includes a plug for something more serious. And there was a little plug which I've extracted here, which was pointing people towards writing up conservation evidence. But it's a great little quote. Science doesn't need to be complicated to be of value. If you want to make comparisons between things over time, sometimes it's just about removing as many biases as you can, taking samples in as random way as possible, and doing things at each point. Yeah, that's a nice summary. I guess for those of us who've come out of with biological sciences degree, we may have kind of walked away with some knowledge of a variety of ecological and biological facts, but maybe slight horror of statistics. And I think that maybe put some people off of experimental design point of view. But I think that there's plenty of information on the internet on design. I've just fished this out quite quickly, about the steps: ask a question, do some research, construct a hypothesis, test with experiment, analyze results, draw conclusions, hypothesis true, hypothesis false, try, think again. The best example of describing science that I use quite often is one of the first biology experiments I remember doing, and many of you may have done it as well, is trying to find out the calorific value of a peanut. You want to find out the calorific value of a peanut. You burn it. That heat released from the peanut warms up the water. You can work out the temperature increase and the volume of the water, and that tells you the calorific value, the amount of energy that was transferred into the water. It's a very simple experiment, but I think if you can break anything down into simple stages like that, you can write that up. You can describe, this is what we did, this is what we found, this is what it means. Science needn't be more complicated than that, and that is the end. So good luck in producing great literature and using great literature.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matthew. That was really interesting. We have a few questions and comments. First of all, so just to clarify, I'm here in the United States. I'm at the University of California in San Diego, and I work frequently with folks who work for our National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and they produce tons of data, and they also provide these reports, these gray literature reports, because they frequently just don't have time to take their data and turn it into a typical publication. And so those types of, and it's extremely powerful to have access to those. And I have that because I work with other NOAA scientists. So, but then also just to clarify, someone wanted to clarify, so those types of reports from government agencies or private agencies or groups or people who are doing environmental impact statements, those aren't count as gray literature. But if you have data from a project that you've never published, or that maybe you have, but you have something else you want to do with it, you can write that paper and turn it in directly to AER as gray literature, correct? So it becomes an outlet for publication for data that you have to write up that you may not have a typical avenue to publish, correct?
I believe so, yes. Yeah.
And so that's just something to sort of encourage everyone to publish, they can turn their data into a publication in a way that's makes use of what they've collected. That's important. Another comment is people were wondering, so in academia, at least in the United States, when you put something into the gray literature, it doesn't so much count toward promotion and tenure. And so, so there's less of a emphasis on putting things into the gray literature. And I think that may be where people fall in that other category of why they don't contribute, because it doesn't count toward promotion and tenure if you're in academia, at least in the United States system. And so this is another potential way or avenue to sort of elevate your gray literature into something more akin to a publication, correct? Maybe it gives it a bit more standing and accessibility for people. And it would make people who have data allow it to be seen by more people, and perhaps be listed in a way that might count more for tenure and promotion.
Yes, I mean, I suppose that coming from outside of academia, with those things are not issue. You know, we don't get measured by the publications that we do. So it's interesting to see that that's something which holds people back from being published, because if it doesn't count, then why bother to publish it? Is the inference, but actually that might be great information for practitioners, and just not publishing it because it doesn't kind of help on your promotion and tenure is not getting the information out there, you know, for people. Yeah,
and so this is a great avenue for that. So another comment was, if someone's not affiliated with an institution, they perceive that they have more difficulty getting published in a typical journal. Personally, as an editor, I don't really pay that much attention at all to the person's institution. I'm mostly looking at their science. So I found that to be interesting. And I don't know, that was just sort of a comment, something to consider or think about. As you know, and so this could also be an avenue if someone's having difficulty publishing in a traditional a traditional journal, then this could be an avenue for them to get their work published. And then someone else asked, would a project that's completed as part of a degree count as gray literature? Absolutely, right?
Yes, I was thinking about that the other day. Actually, there's, I mean, master's projects, BSc projects. That some of them seed scientific reports, you know, that go into published journals. But I would have thought that there must be a lot of others that would very helpfully be going into gray literature.
Well, and frequently, if you get your PhD or your master's degree, you have several chapters, and maybe you have time to publish 2 or 3 of them in journals, and maybe one is like a little wishy-washy. It's perfect to go into gray literature. So anyway, I think that those were some interesting questions, and I just want to encourage everyone. And then we'll move on to the closing. There are so many there's so much available data out there. So someone asked about being able to connect with people who publish or put out this gray literature reports, and trying to connect with them and help make use of those data. And this AER is the exact type of thing that we're trying to create those connections.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there'll be ways to link back to the authors, and you would hope that would seed more discussions and more research, and hopefully, you know, between academia and practitioners. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so with that, I'm gonna share my screen. Let's view this fully here. So I just want to close everything out. So thank you so much to Matthew for joining us today, and thank you to everybody for joining the talk and being a part of this. Our next workshop is going to be on the 11th of November, which is a Wednesday, and we're going to have Nancy Ockenden from the University of Cambridge, and she's going to talk, and her talk's entitled Designing Experiments to Improve Conservation Practice, which is excellent for those of us who are conservation practitioners. And you can register for next month's workshop online. You just can Google AER live workshops, and that comes up, and you can see where you can register. Let's see here. And then if you liked this talk and you want to do this again, then we invite you to get more involved in AER by visiting our website. by seeing us on Twitter, and also by following us on LinkedIn for the latest updates on what's going on. And then finally, I just want to leave you with the details of this offer from NHBS. That's one of our sponsors today, the very important sponsors. And I just want you to know what they're offering so you can take full advantage of this. So NHBS supplies equipment and books for ecologists and for conservation scientists and for professionals, and they're offering free European shipping for AER Live viewers until the end of October. So I invite you to take advantage of that. You can visit their website, and thank you to them for sponsoring us today. So we'll see you again next month, and thank you again for joining us, and thanks again to Matthew. Have a fabulous rest of your day.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye.